Production stops on the set of Spartacus to honor a visitor. Charles Lawton, Gene Simmons, and Peter Ustinov watch Kirk Douglas pass good news to Universal star Tony Curtis.
Hello. I'd like to tell you that the leading German fan magazine, Film Review, conducted a poll among its readers, and it voted as the most popular foreign star of 1958, Tony Curtis, who happens to be a co-star in a picture that we're doing together now called Spartacus. I'd like you to meet someone you know very well, Tony Curtis. Tony?
Thank you, Kirk.
Tony, I just wanted to tell you that this award, which is called a Bombi, by the way, given by Film Review, is equivalent to the Oscar in our own country, and I can't think of anyone who deserves it more. Congratulations.
Very kind. Thank you, Kirk, very much. I would like to thank all the readers of Film Review for voting for me. This is a great honor and a great thrill. Bless you and thank you.
The first overseas premiere of UI's screen epic Spartacus is the most brilliant event on London's show business calendar for the year. Among the many outstanding figures present is Mrs. Pandit, Prime Minister Nehru's sister and Indian High Commissioner in London. The West End rings to the sound of the crowd's cheers as Kirk Douglas and his wife arrive at the theater. One of London's warmest welcomes for Spartacus himself, producer and star of the $12 million film drama. Climaxing the parade of notables of politics, show business, and society is the arrival of Princess Margaret and her husband Anthony Armstrong Jones. The radiant princess wears a black gown studded with tiny lace flowers and a snowy ermine cape. In the foyer, the princess and her husband will meet a host of film industry leaders and ranking stars. Mrs. Christopher Soames, Sir Winston Churchill's daughter, presents Kirk Douglas, and the princess has a lot of questions about Spartacus. Director Stanley Kubrick and UI President Milton Rackmill are next, and then UI's Vice President for Foreign Operations, Americo Abuaf. With curtain time only minutes away, the princess and Mr. Jones enter the theater to see the film which London has already greeted with a full ovation, Spartacus.
Hi. No, I was just telling Joe about the first time I met young Bess. This is young Bess. And this is Joe Summers, my good friend and stand-in.
Hello. This is Ginny. Should I take it?
Yeah. Well, going back to Bessie, she's a very good dog. I think in 9 years, she's only ruined 3 takes on the set. And she's a very good companion to me and Tracy. Oh, that's my daughter, who's the most gorgeous, most beautiful, most talented 3-year-old that's ever been born. And she's always with me when I'm working in Hollywood, and when I'm not working, we go back to the ranch in Arizona. Nope. No, it's a beautiful place. We have a beautiful house there. And we have a swimming pool and a tennis court. And we even have a garbage disposal. We're 2 hours by plane from Los Angeles. And we get lots of visitors, too. Well, yes, I am. But in this particular sequence, I have been taken from Spartacus by the Roman general, played by Sir Laurence Olivier. And he has dressed me in a style befitting his station and his home. And also he promises me my freedom in exchange for certain favors. Yes, it was very exciting. Larry is considered one of the greatest living actors of our day. But sometimes I found it very difficult to work with him because he's so good that I would watch him and forget what I was supposed to be doing. Yes, I've worked with Charles Lawton and Peter Ustinov. Now, Peter's very difficult to work with, too, because he's such a funny man, and I'm a terrible giggler, that I ruined more takes working with him. Tony Curtis, I haven't worked with before, and Kirk Douglas, I've never worked with before. Yes, that's right. I play the part of Varinia, a slave girl who falls in love with the leader of the gladiators, Spartacus, under the most difficult circumstances when we're trying to capture Rome. Some of the love scenes that I play with Kirk are unlike any that I've ever played before. Perhaps you'd like to see one.
Oh, you're cold. Here, get underneath this. Oh, did I hurt you?
No, you didn't.
Oh, I didn't mean to be so rough.
Why don't you kiss me? This is the first time I was ever going to have a baby.
Baby.
I'm just the same as I ever was, Spartacus. It was my pleasure. Thank you and goodbye.
Spartacus was a gladiator who revolted against the power of Rome, and it's a very, very different to the usual Roman film. I find it very interesting to do. I do as much research as possible, not in books, but in newspapers of the period, because even if newspapers don't always express the truth about something, they certainly express the prejudices, and dramatically that's very useful. On the other hand, I have a little maxim, a little rule of my own, that it's never worth playing a hero without a weakness or a villain without a heart. A character must have three dimensions and some sort of inner contradiction to make it interesting. That's true of the man I play in Spartacus, who is a man who thinks life is cheap because everybody else does, but at the same time he's not really a bad man, and perhaps this illustration from the film will prove what I'm talking about. I have more stripes on my back than a zebra. Every time I touch my wounds, they sing, sing like larks. But in spite of that, I think I found something that I never had before, with all my wealth.
What is that?
Well, don't laugh at me, but I believe it to be dignity.
In Rome, dignity shortens life even more surely than disease. The gods must be saving you for some great enterprise.
You think so? Anyone who believes that I'll turn informer for nothing's a fool. I've been on tour in America and found it a most rewarding experience because everybody is very, very hungry for the theater. The European artists are extremely courteously and well treated over here. In this particular film, we have Sir Laurence Olivier, Charles Lawton, Gene Simmons, and myself, all Europeans. And we were all very delighted to have been asked to appear in it, and for it to be thought that we were worth bringing such a distance. There is, of course, one other function which I only mention because of my children. They think that I make comic noises on occasion. They think, in point of fact, that's my only function worth talking about. For instance, a very exasperating noise is a car with a flat battery. Then you have to ask for help. Or else there's the ship in a fog, which goes shh. Or the bad cellist. There should be a tinkle of coins at the end of that.
Well, it was strange, first of all, to get sent a script, a Roman script, without any reference at all to Jesus or the church, because usually those films were a kind of battle between sin and righteousness in those days, which, thanks to the rather strict censorship, turned out to be a victory for the church, but in the last 10 meters. It was always a photo finish. But that way they got the blessing of the various authorities. And I was in the kind of pilot for all these, which was Quo Vadis, and which was not only very close to the church in spirit, but was actually shot in Rome. And this, one got the feeling, was the first really secular film of the period. There were brief references to 2,000 years before or 2,000 in the commentary, but really nothing in the film at all to suggest anything other than a plebeian revolt against the rather barbaric Roman repression. And of course it was Howard Fast who wrote the book and not Sienkiewicz. It made an enormous difference from the beginning. But it was strange to get a film of that sort, because usually they tended to be religious films. This one certainly wasn't. And it was also unusual that it was an independent film, even if it was shot by a major studio. It was Kirk Douglas's own production. I think it was called Briner Productions, which he named after his mother. And so it was a very internal and intimate seed which sprouted into this huge thing. I think the executives were rather nervous of the whole thing at the beginning because of the very lack of that Christian element and the Hays Code and the blessings, which would certainly be of great benefit to the publicity department as we were making it. Quo Vadis, for instance, to revert to that for a moment, we shot that in Holy Year in Rome, and I, for the publicity department, shook hands with innumerable American bishops who always said the same thing, their rimless glasses glinting in the Roman sun. Well, I certainly never thought I'd shake hands with Nero. Well, I had that one time and time again. Luckily, in Spartacus, there was no jokes of that kind. The only thing that happened as we started the film in Death Valley, then still directed by Tony Mann, and he's still responsible for all the scenes in Death Valley at the beginning, a woman came up to me, a tourist, and said, "What is the name of this picture going to be?" And I said, "Spartacus." I couldn't speak too loud because they were shooting. I said, "Spartacus." She said, "Spartacle? That's a funny name for a major picture." Anyway, be that as it may, it shows a completely different ambiance from the piety of Quo Vadis. I must say I'm very grateful to Kirk Douglas for having given me the part. I enjoyed playing it within the limits imposed by the strange things that happened. It was a very heady mixture. There were some very different people at loggerheads with each other in that film. But it was a very, very rewarding experience. And I think he was, as I said before, very courageous in undertaking a film of these dimensions on this particular book at that particular time. I hold Howard Fast in high regard, and I was keen to be a part of that team. At the same time, we all got a slightly nefarious pleasure out of the fact, which I don't know whether it's true or not, but we heard that Kirk Douglas went for the weekend to Palm Springs, exhausted by his work. He didn't even bother to change. He went as a slave, coiled up in some rags at the back of his limousine, and he slept almost as soon as he got into the limousine. And the chauffeur stopped at Banning, I think it was, about halfway, in order to get some gas. And Kirk Douglas woke up because there was no motion, saw that there was no one around, and thought, I'll take this opportunity to relieve myself, and went to the toilet. The man came out from paying for the gas, looked in the back and saw a pile of rags and said he's got to be under it. Got in the car and drove off, and Kirk Douglas was stranded in the middle of nowhere, dressed as a Roman slave and covered with grime, protesting he was Kirk Douglas, which they found hard to believe. Naturally, we, all of us, had heard this story, got quite a degree of pleasure out of it, which perhaps shows that they were all iconoclasts by nature. I hope, looking at Kirk today, he doesn't seem to come out of it too badly. The helicopter must have been much more frightening than that. I don't know why there should be a feeling that it was two films. I've heard this before, that it was partly noble and dealing with the highest possible level. I don't see that revolution conducted that way is really very high level, and that really people had no right to behave wittily in ancient Rome. They should all be of the same mold. But all things in life exist side by side, and there's absolutely no reason why they should be incompatible. I think that's a prejudice which arose from the period then when they expected the thing to have one overall colour, and where anything comic was termed as relief, which is so silly and stupid. It isn't relief. Life is full of comedy. And to my mind, comedy is merely tragedy which has gone wrong. And, of course, tragedy is merely comedy which has gone wrong. It's liable to happen to everything because life is full of surprises. And the most mature kinds of work are ones in which you don't know whether you're going to be asked to laugh or to cry at the next moment. That is really drama as I see it. I don't believe in comedy, or slapstick, or tragedy. I think it has to be a mixture, if it is going to be at all lifelike, and remind people of their own experiences. After all drama is really, in a sense, relies upon elements which people have seen but have not really noticed. All Shakespeare does, to take it at its highest, is to bring things to your attention which make you say, my God, how true that is. Yes, I hadn't thought of it. It's quite untrue. Of course you thought of it, but you hadn't put it into words. You hadn't put it into actions. You hadn't been moved or made to laugh by it. And that's the whole art of the drama. Working with Kubrick was interesting. He was a young man then who wasn't. And I put in my book, perhaps a little unwarranted, a little cruel, that he showed none of the virtues or vices of youth. But I think he was keeping them to himself, that's all. I don't think he felt very comfortable with a film of those dimensions. Why should anybody feel comfortable with such huge responsibility of battle scenes and goodness knows what? I don't think we ever really saw the real Kubrick. I mean, I think Kubrick was a man who was using this, quite rightly, in order to hit the big time, but whose faith was really basically in the small time, which became big. I think he wanted to do films his own way, and I think he really basically lived with the thing, but didn't really feel it as profoundly as perhaps he would have done had he been at a different phase in his career. I never understood exactly why they'd got rid of Tony Mann, except that I should imagine that Kirk had wanted Kubrick from the beginning, because they had done Paths of Glory together, and obviously Kirk quite rightly had enormous faith in Kubrick. But I thought Tony Mann was worthy of more respect than was shown him. He was an astonishing character in any case, and all the beginning of the film, which you see in the movie houses today, even recreated, is all his. He was an astonishing character because he belonged to some kind of vague religious sect, his parents did, in the Californian hills, in which he never wore clothes at all, I think, until he was about 21. And when something disastrous happened to the sect, they went bankrupt and they all had to go to work. And Tony Mann was plummeted from a nudist existence and sun worship straight into the garment district in New York as an apprentice. If he survived that, I think he was tough enough to survive most things. I remember that we also all appeared in Hollywood at different times, and I suspected we all had slightly different scripts, which rather favored our parts. And since Laurence Olivier got there about a week before anybody else, he had Kirk Douglas's ear. And when we did the first reading of this, it didn't quite resemble what we'd received in the post and agreed to. And I remember that first reading with enormous clarity, because I was dressed in a relaxed manner that you find me in today, except I've moved with the times, I think. And Charles Lawton was in a dressing gown with his hair in curlers. And Olivier was dressed normally with a sports jacket. Kirk Douglas was dressed as a slave and covered with dirt and grime. He'd already been leaping from things. And John Gavin was dressed in the full regalia of an important Roman chief of the period. We started the reading, and it was quite different. It started out with Olivier in this version. And he put on a pair of glasses, very relaxed, and started reading the script. "O great Lord, although I don't know what, you will hail, O great one." And it was like a litany in church. I couldn't hear what he was saying. And I saw Lawton's face out of the corner of my eye going. Then Lawton came in, made his entrance, and said, "Hail, you great gods of Rome." And again, it was practically inaudible. And I thought to myself, if the race is going to be run at this speed, I'm not going to start sprinting. It's ridiculous. So my entrance came, and I said, "Ha, my slaves will be willing to know this." And and again, I joined the general litany. It was only John Gavin, who has the sensibility of an actor, and it was later your ambassador in Mexico, who seemed to be impervious to this general atmosphere of murmuring, and suddenly said, "Oh, great gods that here declare," and he was off on his own, rather, I thought. This went on, getting more and more awkward as we began to realize the script was rather different to what we had been led to expect, until Lawton suddenly stopped dead and said, "I don't understand this scene." And one smelled trouble. There was a look of complicity between Kirk and Laurence Olivier. And Laurence Olivier said, "Well, I thought it's my idea, dear boy, this scene. I thought I would represent the future, John Gavin the present, and you, Charles, the past." Charles, I think, deliberately misunderstanding, said, "Why do I represent the present?" No, dear boy, you represent the past. It's Gavin who represents the present, and I represent the future. Well, it didn't get any further, and suddenly Olivier, exasperated by this almost animal dislike of Lawton, said, "Would it help if I read it to you?" And Lawton reacted. "Yes." Laurence Olivier changed his glasses and read the scene. The quality of the silence greeting him was such that he eventually didn't have the courage to finish it, and said more or less like that. And Lawton said, biding his time, "Yes, I thought for a moment, a little while back, that I might eventually understand it. Now I'm afraid I'm completely lost." And we abandoned the reading. We all went back to our places. And that was largely why Lawton became extremely difficult and wouldn't do what he was given. And that's when I was called in by the powers that be and asked to write the scenes between him and myself, which I was glad to do. He took me once to his caravan for a bull shot, which he enjoyed very much, which I think is bouillon, a beef tea mixed with vodka in a thermos. And he kept a thermos of it under his toga, and produced it occasionally. And we sat in his caravan on the Universal lot discussing life. And suddenly one of those loads of tourists arrived. Universal was, unlike other studios, encouraged visits from tourists and charged rather heavily for them. And two ladies passed by, and they both looked at Lawton and said, oh, don't tell me, oh, the greatest. Oh, you are the greatest." And Charles, who spent most of his time loitering, waiting to be offended, he was an extremely vulnerable, sensitive soul. He was now, of course, equally open to flattery, and when he heard that, he preened. "Thank you." And then the woman said, "Your role as Big Daddy was just the greatest thing we ever saw. Isn't that so, Mabel?" "Yes, we loved it." And then it turned rancid, of course. He became offended again. And the two women went away, and he was inconsolable. I said, "Oh, Charles, come on." The thing to do in these moments is to imagine how it could have been worse than it was. What could be worse than that? I said, many things. They may realize their mistake and come back. That is going to be worse. At that moment, there they were.
Oh, how will you ever forgive us? Mabel told me afterwards I'd made the most ghastly mistake. Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's all right, my dear. No, yeah, just awful.
But I want to tell you something. You're just as good as Burl Ives.
This, again, it made matters worse, and they went on talking, adding to this, until he, eager to have his revenge, said to them, pointing to me for the first time that they hadn't noticed, "I bet you don't know who this is." And the women looked at me, and one of them said, "Oh, yeah, don't tell me. I know that. I've got it. Yeah, Walter Ustinov." So from that time on, I was Walter Ustinov. My son did a good job directing. There was a moment when there was a Roman column marching up the hill where the people were crucified, and there were a whole lot of tensions in those days in the news with I think it was the Korean War then, wasn't it? Around about then. But suddenly an aeroplane, I don't know where it came from, it must have taken off from Burbank or someone very close to, because it hadn't gained a great deal of height. It came, and the Universal lot is rather mountainous, where we did our job. We were marching along the road, and suddenly an aeroplane came over terribly, terribly low. And a rather big aeroplane for Burbank, but I think it must have been a sort of 14-passenger one. And I remember shouting out to the Roman legion, "Scatter, they're Greek." And they did. The publicity lady, Sonia Wolfson, I think her name was, she came up to me and said, "Oh, Peter, steer clear of the commissary today. Hedda Hopper's in there and she doesn't want to see you." Oh, this is like a red rag to a bull. I didn't want to see Hedda Hopper, but I didn't see why I shouldn't be seen by Hedda Hopper. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "No, it's too embarrassing." And I eventually, I wheedled it out of her. Hedda Hopper had said to someone that I was so brilliant in Quo Vadis, I've got to be queer. Well, of course, I needed no second bidding. I went straight to the commissary, went up to her and said, "How are you?" Ha, 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 and behaved in the way of a rather gross English sergeant. And we never had that trouble again. I'm not a great expert on how much films cost, but there was a rumor, of course, that it was the most expensive film that was ever made, because the publicity departments always regarded such rumors as excellent. I can't imagine why, because I don't see any link personally between the cost and the result. But I suppose somebody going, thinking I'm going to see the most expensive film ever made, will look at it as an accountant and enjoy the sight. I personally didn't. I know that for my contribution to the writing, I didn't accept a fee because I thought it was part of the job. They didn't want to give me a fee either because they'd already accounted for everything. But they offered me, in those days it was quite legal, in the days of payola, I think it was called, they offered me a Cadillac convertible. But I couldn't see myself on the local roads in Europe driving this enormous thing which takes the room of three things to park, with enormous fins as well, which I didn't like very much. Like somebody, like a beautiful model with enormous shoulder blades. I declined the Cadillac. America had just gone through a rather degrading episode with the McCarthy Army hearings. And there was still a backwash of all that. Nobody quite sure whether it was over. It's like an illness. They didn't know whether it was safe to get out of bed yet. And we just hit that period. And Kirk, with a great deal of courage, it's awful to say that it had to be courage, but it was, got Dalton Trumbo, who was blacklisted as no one else was, to write the script. He wrote the script under the name of Sam Jackson. Nobody knew who Sam Jackson was, but it was obviously a mysterious character who was involved in this. And when I wrote my sections of it for Lawton, I handed in my script under the name Stonewall Ustinov. I thought that made a nice couple of writers. I was taken by Tony Mann to see Dalton Trumbo at the beginning, and he was living as a kind of comfortable recluse with a parrot, I remember. And I found him a very engaging fellow, and I got on awfully well with him. Kirk Douglas makes some sort of mention in his book that one of the reasons for firing Tony Mann was that he gave me my head, and he'd obviously broken some kind of confidence in showing me Dalton Trumbo at work. Tony Mann, who was a very delightful character and a very interesting character, did it, I think, because he thought we would enjoy each other. In that sense, he was absolutely right. I enjoyed Dalton Trumbo, and I had no respect for the Army McCarthy hearings. In fact, I'd done 2 very explosive pieces at the behest of the BBC, for the BBC, just about those hearings. And I was attacked then by a columnist called Jimmy Fiddler, I think, I don't know whether he still exists, who came off his roof and said that was the way I repaid American hospitality, by attacking Senator McCarthy. Well, I'd do it again at a drop of a hat. I remember rather criticized when I got the Oscar for it for not looking surprised. Well, I'll tell you why. I'm not a believer necessarily in the zodiac or in numerology, but it's been a fact throughout my life that 6 has been my lucky number. I can't tell you why. I was sitting in another Cadillac with my lawyer from New York, who's still my lawyer from New York and a very old friend, and who said to me, "Peter, don't count on winning. They got Sal Mineo in there, and they've just done Exodus, and there's enormous swell of pro-Israeli feeling, and I think it's got to go to him." I said, "I'm quite prepared for it to go to anyone you like, but..." And then I looked at the distant building as the cars were standing in line, and it said in luminous letters, 33rd Annual Oscar Awards. I thought that's strange, and then I looked at the ticket, and it was seat number 24 in row F, both of which add up to 6. Then I looked at the tickets for the banquet afterwards, and I'd been invited to Warner Brothers' table, for whom I was going to do the Sundowners, and it was table number 6. Then I looked at the other table to which I'd been invited, which was Allied Artists, a small company of the time, therefore it had a much higher number. I was going to do Billy Budd for them, and it was table number 42. And I said to my lawyer, "You know, there's too much of a coincidence, all this. I have a strange feeling I've got a chance." He said, "Peter, don't let it enter your head. I don't want to see you disappointed. Make your mind up now, you're not going to win. Sal Mineo's got it." And then I explained to him why. And the driver of the car, the Cadillac, said, "Well, I got to tell you, I was supposed to drive Sal Mineo, but they switched plans, and I'm driving you instead, and it's my 33rd birthday." I said to myself, that does it. And so when they read out my name, I kissed my wife, I think, and went on the stage, and people said, "You didn't look very gracious, you didn't look surprised." Well, why should I, with that kind of evidence?